Good afternoon, and welcome everyone to today's Southern Fire Exchange webinar. My name is David Godwin, and I am the Outreach Coordinator for the Southern Fire Exchange. Today, we're excited to have our guest speaker, Lauren Pyle, researcher and PhD candidate with Clemson University. Today, Lauren will be giving a presentation on her research on managing Chinese tallow using a suite of integrated techniques. Lauren is a PhD candidate in the forest resources at Clemson University under the supervision of Dr. Jeff Wong in the Silviculture and Ecology Lab. She has an anticipated graduation date of this December. Her research focus is invasion and disturbance ecology and their relation to silviculture in building resilient forested communities. She is also the president of the South Carolina Exotic Pest Plant Council, the secretary and treasurer of her local SAF chapter, and a certified non-commercial pesticide applicator. Well, welcome, Lauren. We're really excited to have you with us today, and we're excited that all of you guys have joined us for our webinar. And just one moment as we bring up her presentation.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. I'm very excited to share with you the research I've been doing on Parris Island for the control of Chinese tallow. As David mentioned, please feel free to ask questions during the webinar. You can type them into the chat section, and I will try to do my best to answer them along the way. And of course, there will be time at the end for me to address questions there. And you can always feel free to contact me. My email address will be at the end of the presentation. All right, so with that, let's get started. I will mention that I do have a little bit of a cold, so I apologize for that. So what we're going to be talking about today is Chinese tallow, and I'm sure for most of you that are on this webinar, one of the big reasons why you're here is because you know already something about Chinese tallow. But let's review a little bit. So it's a highly invasive tree species, primarily invasive along the southeastern coastal plain, basically from mid-North Carolina down through the Texas panhandle. It was brought here in the early 1800s by Benjamin Franklin as an ornamental species. And then it was planted by the U.S. as an agricultural species for the production of tallow, which is the fruit, for candle and soap making, primarily in Alabama and Louisiana. Because of that, it has now become one of the most dominant species in Louisiana, Alabama, and southeastern Texas. And so a little bit of background about Chinese tallow in terms of its ecology. It is it has high reproductive potential. So it can produce, it's been noted to produce 100,000 seeds per mature tree. It's been cultivated for centuries in China for its fruit, so this selection pressure may have aided in its reproductive output, as has been documented. And it's also able to produce root sprouts, stem sprouts, which also limits the mechanical removal methods used just on their own. So if you're to, cut the bud portion of the tree, you're basically going to end up with a whole bunch of root sprouts and stem sprouts, taking one tree into lots of trees. It also has a persistent seed bank. So the seeds can remain viable in the soil for up to 5 to 7 years, which means management plans must be at least as long to manage this tree as well. And silvicultural treatments and natural disturbances such as hurricanes have also been documented as increasing Chinese tallow abundance, especially with that readily available seed bank. Any sort of disturbance can facilitate its establishment in forest stands. It's also tolerant to a wide range of abiotic stressors, including it's tolerant to moderate levels of flooding and saline. It's intermediate in shade tolerance, which basically allows it to establish under intact forest canopies. And this makes it a significant threat to forest management and conservation objectives. Since it is an invasive species and introduced from abroad, it was introduced without native predators. It's also in a family and genus that are not represented in our native ecosystems, further reducing the chance of shared predators. Let's see. And then it's also bird dispersed. So this bird dispersal aids in long-distance dispersal and can also help in dispersal to new safe sites, increasing its range of invasion. It's also a fire suppressor in many of the ecosystems that it invades in the southeastern coastal plain, which are primarily frequent fire return interval systems. It has really rapid leaf decomposition in comparison to our native species, and this basically reduces the continuity of the fuels to carry fire. So a little bit of background about where we did our work. We are at Parris Island Marine Corps Base. This is on the southeastern coastal plain. It is an island. It's a very interesting place to work. It is where all of the Marines from east of the Mississippi go to boot camp, and all of the women from throughout the United States go to boot camp as well. So it's an active Marine Corps base. This also provides one of our main objectives for this study was not only to focus on controlling Chinese tallow and sort of restoring the natural ecological community to these forests, but also looking at how the current structure of these forests are impeding military training. And so one of the main focuses was to help reduce understory shrub density to allow for more movement throughout the forest stands. So in 2001, Parris Island began managing for invasive species by contracting a invasive species control management group, and they surveyed the entire island looking for all invasive species and documenting which ones were a great threat to the natural resources at Parris Island. In 2006, they began working on Chinese tallow exclusively. And basically the way that they were managing Chinese tallow was to use hack and squirt herbicide applications. For the most part, they would go into one forest stand 1 year and not return to that stand again, which basically when you have a species that's able to root sprout, stump sprout, or any mortality that does not occur through hack and squirt, you're still leaving out seed sources out there. And so without repeated treatments, you're not actually controlling the species that well. So in 2010, for my master's degree, I was contracted by the Department of Defense to resurvey Parris Island, looking to see how effective their management control of Chinese tallow and other non-native species was, and to provide future recommendations for control. As you can see between the two maps there, one in 2001 and the other one in 2010, there's a huge increase in Chinese tallow population throughout the island. And so from that, from my master's degree, we basically worked together to create a more broadly based ecological method for controlling Chinese tallow that would also work with the objectives of increasing native species diversity and reducing understory density. And so just a little bit of background in invasive species management. There is a critical need for a practical and effective framework that links ecological theory to invasive species management. So not just targeting one species with a herbicide, but looking at the ecology of the species and also the ecology of the community that it's invading. These two can't be separated when you're trying to manage natural ecosystems. So in the past, most weed management approaches have developed from agriculture, basically where you remove the one species and you expect for productivity to increase. However, that does not account for the complexity of our natural ecosystems. And so the objectives of our study were to determine the most effective ecologically based management option to reduce Chinese tallow abundance and establishment. And with that, we wanted to determine the treatment effect on native species abundance and diversity, and to promote native species diversity and also ecosystem function. And when we're talking about ecosystem function, we're talking about reestablishing fire to this ecosystem or this community. And so a little bit of, give you a little bit of an idea of what kind of forest communities that we're working in. We're primarily working in a slash pine dominated overstory mixed in with live oak, sweet gum, green ash. And in the understory, we have a pretty dense array of yaupon and wax myrtle, and then also Chinese tallow. So Chinese tallow will be in the overstory canopy and also as a understory, midstory species. The ground layer is mostly going to be regeneration of woody species, and then smilax and rubus are predominant throughout. So the study design at Parris Island was that we had these 4 treatment types that we came up with. The mechanical herbicide and fire treatment, this is our fully integrated treatment, is going to be looking at the ecology of the species and also in restoring the ecological community at Parris Island. And then we compared that treatment type to 3 other treatments. We have a mechanical and herbicide treatment. This one is looking at just removing the understory density and then coming back with herbicide exclusively on Chinese tallow. And then our next treatment type is herbicide and fire, looking to see if the mechanical treatment is not needed and all we need to do is apply herbicide and then fire back to the ecosystem. And then herbicide only serves as our control. So since herbicide has been used in the past and it's what people usually use to control an invasive species, that is our control. So that's what we're measuring all of our other treatments against. And so we have 8 blocks, and you can see at the map over to the right, they're widely distributed throughout the island, and they sort of represent different areas and locations throughout the island. We have 32 experimental units. Each experimental unit is where the treatment occurred, and these are about 1 acre to 5 acres in size. And within each experimental unit, we have a 20 by 40 meter vegetation plot. And this vegetation plot is how we're recording the changes in Chinese tallow and also native species over time. And so throughout the 20 by 40 meter plot, we measured all trees greater than 3 centimeters in dBH. They're recorded by species and by dBH. And within 4 random 10 by 10 meter subplots, so those are all located within that 20 by 40 meter plot, we recorded all shrub and sapling trees by dBH and also by species. And then we have 1 by 1 meter quadrats that are inside each one of those 10 by 10 meter subplots, so there's 8 of them total. And that's where we're measuring the changes in ground layer species and also regeneration of our woody species. So let's look at our first treatment, our mechanical herbicide fire treatment, which is our ecologically based integrated approach to trying to control Chinese tallow and also restore native species diversity and reduce that understory density to hopefully carry fire. All right, and I just had a question from Chris, and he's asking, was herbicide hack and squirt or just herbicide? So it was actually a hack and squirt with herbicide. So basically an injection method of herbicide application that was used throughout Parris Island. Okay, so our first treatment was their mechanical treatment, and so that occurs in the spring, and I'll give you some background on why we chose certain timing throughout the year. And that was followed by a application of herbicide in the fall of the same year, targeting regeneration of Chinese tallow. And then 2 years later, we came back with a growing season application of prescribed fire. Prescribed fire in the growing season is supposed to have the greatest impact on Chinese tallow, and that's been documented by James Grace. And then we wanted to reestablish the fire return interval at Parris Island. So Chinese tallow is able to reach reproductive maturity within 5 years, or 3 years, and in optimum growing conditions. So one of our ideas is to reestablish a frequent fire regime that helps to keep Chinese tallow at an immature state. And so just to go through how we chose this treatment. So if we're looking at the ecology of Chinese tallow, the idea is that in the spring, when total non-structural carbohydrates, those are basically the energy store for the production of leaves, fruit, and flowers, is moving up through the roots and into the top of the tree, as it's for leaf break and bud break. So at that time, it's the most susceptible to removal, above ground removal. And so we're coming in with a mulcher and basically mulching the entire top part of the tree. Now, of course, this is not going to be a targeted treatment. This is also going to target all of our understory shrubs and saplings, everything else that's down there at the time. And so it does have implications for native species as well. So with that being said, to reduce understory density, just these are a few pictures to give you an idea of the density issues at Paris Island. So if we look, this is Hunter, he's one of my technicians, and you can see that's very dense with slash pine regeneration. And then this is Stephen, and this is very dense with yaupon and wax myrtle, and there's some tallow mixed in there as well. And then this is Matthew, where there's a lot of vines, and then there's actually, these are tallow through here. Let me see if I can get my little pointer to work. Maybe not. Click. Oh, my pointer's not working. Okay. So we wanted to also reduce the understory density as well. David's trying to make me use the pointer. Oh no, it's not working. Okay, so we also wanted to use mulching to promote fuels, and this is this quote here kind of gives you an idea. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, stands of Chinese tallow are excellent at completely excluding the fuel species that drive fire. It is common to watch a prescribed fire burn right up to the edge of a tallow stand and simply go out. It is possible for tallow to render the ecosystem non-flammable. So he's speaking about excluding the fuel species that drive fire, but also that rapid leaf decomposition can reduce the continuity of fuels on the ground. So we've removed the top portion of the tree with our mechanical treatment. So in the summer, we're going to get regeneration. So we're going to have stump sprouts and root sprouts, and also seedlings are going to come up. So we need to do something about that. So our follow-up treatment in the fall of the same year is to come back with herbicide, as the non-structural carbohydrates are moving back down into the roots. And this is a key time to do this so that that herbicide is actually translocated down into the root system. So we come back, we spray our herbicide. It's a foliar application of herbicide, and that's to reduce the above story and also hopefully kill the rootstock as well. However, you know, as we know, Chinese tallow has a 5 to 7 year seed bank, and it's also able to come into our system repeatedly because of, you know, other trees that are around the area. So we're going to get regeneration again. And so 2 years later, following our mechanical and our herbicide treatment, and we come back with a prescribed fire. And so this is a growing season fire. Chinese tallow has really thin bark when it's young, and so it's highly susceptible to fire in younger stages. So we're hoping that fire treatment will not only help to control the Chinese tallow at a younger stage, but also to promote native species diversity. And so, like I said, our goal is to control the tallow, but also promote native species diversity and ecosystem function through fire. So our next treatment is our mechanical herbicide treatment. And that's where we're going in the same time of year, spring, and we're following up with the herbicide treatment on the regeneration using a foliar application. So basically the same type of treatment, but without fire. And I'm being asked a few questions on the herbicide, and I'm actually going to get to that in a second. And so then we had a treatment that was herbicide and fire. So this is actually doing a dormant stem application of herbicide. And this is primarily using hack and squirt on trees that were greater than 6 inches in dBH, or basal bark treatment for trees that were less than 6 inches in dBH. And then we follow up with a prescribed fire 2 years later, and we see the outcomes of that as well. And so just to give you an idea of when these treatments occurred, we have these little triangles represent when we did the vegetation surveys. Let's see if I can get this pointer to work. He's stuck. Okay, so the triangles represent when we did the vegetation survey. So we did a pre-vegetation survey in the summer of 2012. Then we did our mechanical treatment in the spring of 2013. We followed up that with a survey in the summer of 2013 just in those mechanical plots. And then we had a herbicide application in the fall of 2013. And then we did a vegetation survey in summer of 2014, and then a fire treatment this spring in 2015. And our last vegetation survey was actually the summer of 2015. And so I want to give a little bit of background on the methods for the prescribed burn. So we also needed to take data on the fuels and fire measurements throughout the prescribed burn because we wanted to compare the fuel loading between the mechanical stands and the non-mechanical stands. So we had 30 square centimeter destructive sampling. When we had 12 of these throughout each stand, and we basically took the fuels, destructively sampled them, brought them back to Clemson, dried them, weighed them by size class to determine fuel loading based on the two stand types. Like I said, the mechanical stands and the non-mechanical stands. And so we also measured the duff layer and also the litter layer. It's like a little brownie, but that's the duff layer, the non-consolidated material. And then we also wanted to see how much of the duff and litter was consumed by the fire. So we placed these 60 penny nails, one level with the litter layer and then one level with the duff layer. So as the fire moved through, we were actually able to see how much of the litter was consumed by the fire. Okay. And so we also needed to measure fire temperature. And so we put out these paint stakes. Each paint stake had 10 different fire-sensitive temperature paints. Hold on one second. Okay. And so we also needed to measure how much of the area burned within inside the plot, because that can actually have a major impact on how much our tallow is controlled and our native species in terms of how much the fire actually did within inside each experimental unit. So we wanted to compare these to our typical methods of control, and this is our herbicide treatment, our herbicide alone treatment. And this is where we just either did the hack and squirt for species that were, or trees that were greater than 6 inches in dBH, or trees that were 6 inches or less in dBH. We did a basal bark application, which you can see in this picture. And these are all dormant stem applications, and they were done during the winter. And so in asking about the herbicide, for the mechanical treatment, so that's looking at the mechanical herbicide and fire treatment and the mechanical herbicide treatment, we used a foliar application of 2.5% Garlon 4 Ultra with a 1% MSO to basically act as a glue to the leaves, and then 1% blue indicator dye. And this is targeting any regeneration, so stem sprouts that you can see here, seedlings, or root sprouts. And then for our herbicide fire and herbicide only treatment, we used a dormant stem application with a 25% 74% MSO methylated seed oil and 1% blue indicator dye. These are all applied using a backpack sprayer, and this was hack and squirt and then also a basal bark treatment. right, so for those of you that are interested in the data analysis, this is the boring slide where I talk about how we actually analyze the data, but still important. So a statistical model is developed consistent with the experiment design. The model contained block, year, and their interactions, and block was included as a random factor in the model. ANOVA is used to develop F-statistics to test the model terms, and specific contrasts are used to determine the effect of treatments. When I'm talking about specific contrasts, it's basically comparing treatment types. So the mechanical treatment versus the non-mechanical treatments, the fire treatments versus the non-fire treatments, and then our fully integrated treatment, the mechanical herbicide fire treatment, versus all of the other treatments. Those are the specific contrasts that we are interested in looking at. And then any p-value less than alpha of 5 was evidence for a significant result. So when I say that it was significant, we're looking at an alpha of 0.05. So our impacts of Chinese tallow. So prior to treatment, we had a density that ranged from about 1,000 stems per hectare to 2,500 stems per hectare. Basal area was anywhere from about 2 to 4 meters squared per hectare. In regeneration, this is a cover class, about 1% cover class of regeneration of Chinese tallow. And so our effective mechanical mastication, or mulching treatment, if we look at the mulching treatment, we see a significant decline in our density, or stems per hectare. And you can see that the understory here is much more open. In the back, you can see actually the mechanical mulcher and how dense the understory was prior. And this is significant. Oh, yay, my pointer's working. Oh, it just went away. Okay, so density and then treatment year, and our mechanical treatment thereafter resulted in significant decrease in density. So if we look at regeneration, there was actually an increase in regeneration after the mechanical treatment, but it was actually non-significant. You can see here the fuel loading from the mechanical treatment in the form of mulch and the seedlings that are coming up from the soil. So how did the mechanical mastication affect our fuel loads prior to fire? So if we look at our fuel depths, about 5 centimeters for both of the two treatment types. And then duff depths were also similar, about 2 centimeters. And then if we look at our fuel loading, our litter layer was similar. Our 1 hour fuels, we actually had greater 1 hour fuels in our mechanical treatment, and also greater 10-hour fuels, which makes sense because we put, the standing biomass that was standing onto the ground. Even though this is 2 years later, and we did have quite a bit of decomposition in that mulch layer, we still had a lot of residual mulch out there. There was no difference between the 100-hour fuels and fuel loading for if we looked at 1 to 100-hour fuels. There was a significant difference between if we had mechanical or not mechanical in there. The 1,000-hour fuels are actually still in progress. There is no current equation for biomass of Chinese tallow, and we did have a few standing logs out there that could not be masticated, so we actually had to use a chainsaw and lay those on the ground. So we're still coming up with a allometric equation to determine how much biomass is out there on the ground. So the effect of prescribed fire on Chinese tallow. So if you guys were on the coastal plain of South Carolina in April, it was a very, very wet year. And you can see here as we're trying to apply the fire, it's actually our fire lines have standing water in the fire line. It was actually really wet. It was hard to get a fire to actually carry through many of these stands. We actually had to try a few times. If we had waited a few more weeks, we would actually probably have had better results. But we needed to get the treatments done so that I could resurvey by August. So it was a little problematic, but I think we would have had better results if it wasn't so wet. And so if we think back about what I said earlier with Chinese tallow having rapid leaf decomposition and being able to suppress fire from the ecosystem, I looked at the basal area of Chinese tallow in 2014, so the year prior to our fire treatment, and the percent area burned. And we did see a relationship between how much Chinese tallow was still residual in these plots versus how much of the area burned. And there's a negative relationship with that. So Chinese tallow could be possibly resulting in these communities. So we look at the impact of the fire on just the litter that was out there. So litter consumed was actually the same, and also the area burned was actually the same between the two treatment types. So even though we thought that the mechanical treatment would help carry a fire through these communities because it opens up the understory, allows more air into these ecosystems, or into these communities, the herbicide fire treatment also burned the same amount of area, even though that was quite dense. So the effect of our integrated treatments on Chinese tallow, if we're looking at the overall results here. So on our x-axis here, we have year, and on our y, we have density. And if we look at 2012, basically our density is similar across each different treatment type. In 2013, we had our mechanical treatment, and you can see the reduction of Chinese tallow density in both of those treatment types. And then in late 2013, we had our herbicide treatment in all of our treatment areas, and you can see the reduction Chinese tallow density there, but we still have this legacy effect of our mechanical treatment where we had less tallow in our mechanical treatment types than our non-mechanical treatment types. And then this spring, we had our fire treatment in 2015, and then actually you can see our effect of fire. So our mechanical treatments are the green and the yellow, and our yellow, which is just mechanical and herbicide, also had an increase in density, and then our red, which is the herbicide alone, basically remained the same from 2014 to 2015. However, the effect of fire had a significant difference between the fire treatments, so herbicide and fire, and mechanical herbicide and fire, versus the ones that did not have a fire treatment, which is just the herbicide alone or the mechanical herbicide treatment. All right, so if we look at regeneration, so we have our percent regeneration on our y-axis and our year, and if we look again at the years, while these are non-significant, you can see that the mechanical herbicide in the beginning had a little bit more regeneration of Chinese tallow prior to our treatments. Once again, we had our mechanical treatment in 2013, and you can see that actually our mechanical treatment increased the regeneration, the percent regeneration of Chinese tallow. When we came back, we did apply herbicide to the regeneration, and you can see a reduction there. But you can still see a legacy effect of that mechanical treatment in the fact that it increased our regeneration of Chinese tallow, even with the application of herbicide. So we came back with our fire treatment in 2015, and at this point, actually, all of our treatments are the same in terms of regeneration. And okay, so let's look at the data over the years. So we have log density over here on our y-axis, and again, the year on the x-axis. Everybody started about the same in 2012. In 2013, all we measured was the mechanical stands. So these two data points up here don't actually exist. The line is just going straight through. And so you do see a reduction in 2013 in our mechanical stands, which you would think in general. And then in 2014 is where we start to separate. And then 2015 is where we started separating even more after all of the treatments have been prescribed. So if we look at it across each one, up top, one still with the highest density is our herbicide treatment. followed by our mechanical herbicide treatment. And the ones that had the greatest effect were our herbicide and fire treatment. Our mechanical herbicide and fire treatment was actually the most effective at reducing the density of Chinese tallow. Okay, so a little bit of a table for you guys. So if we look at our, up here we're looking at our density, and then our regeneration, our percent regeneration. So if we look at our treatment was significant, year was also significant, and our interaction was significant. But really what I want to look at here is our contrast. So this contrast here is looking at our mechanical treatments versus our non-mechanical treatments, and that had a significant impact on regeneration. And so if we look back up here on our mechanical treatments, they were actually significantly higher than our non-mechanical treatments for regeneration. Now if we look at the second one, and it's our mechanical, it's our fire treatments versus our non-fire treatments, and that had a significant impact on our density. So if we were able to, I don't have the ability to show you right here, but our fire impact had a significant reduction on the density of Chinese tallow. And then this one, our contrast here, is looking at our mechanical herbicide fire treatment versus all of our other treatment types. And that also had a significant reduction in Chinese tallow. And if you look up here, our mechanical herbicide fire treatment has the lowest log density of Chinese tallow. And so just to summarize the effect of Chinese tallow, or the effect of our treatments on Chinese tallow, our mechanical treatments are significant in increasing the regeneration of Chinese tallow, but decreasing the stem density. Our fire treatments are significant in reducing the density of Chinese tallow. And this is actually a stand that we did not have the mechanical mulching in, and you can see how dense the understory is. And so our mechanical herbicide fire treatment has a significantly greater impact on Chinese tallow density than all of our other treatment types. Okay, so let's take a minute and look at the impacts to the community. I'm not looking specifically at the different species here, but because we just don't have enough time for that, but just sort of looking at effects to density and ground layer species richness. Okay, and so once again we have a similar chart to the one that we had before. So we're looking at our tree basal area and density, and our sapling and shrubs basal area and density. And now this is including all species recorded in the experimental units. And so again, we look at what was significant here. Our mechanical treatment was significant in reducing the density of our experimental units of all species for trees, for shrubs, and saplings, which makes sense since we mulched the entire understory. And so then if we look at our mechanical herbicide fire treatment versus all of our other treatments, we see that that treatment has the most significant impact on the density of trees, so anything greater than 3 centimeters in dBH. And then also on the basal area and density of our sapling and shrubs in the mid-story. So now if we look at the regeneration layer in the ground layer, my pointer back, we see that the mechanical herbicide fire treatment is the only one that has any impact on our ground layer richness. So if we look up here, our richness in our ground layer is actually much higher than the other ones, the other treatment types. Whereas if we look at regeneration, there's actually no effect of any of the treatment types on the regeneration of woody species in the forest understory. Okay, so just to conclude, tree density was significant by treatment type. The mechanical treatments, our mechanical herbicide and fire and mechanical herbicide, were significant in reducing tree density, and our mechanical herbicide, hold on one second, sorry. Sorry about that. 'Tis the season to have a cold. Mechanical herbicide and fire treatment was significant when compared to other treatments in reducing tree density. The shrub density and basal area were significant by treatment type as well. The mechanical treatments, mechanical herbicide, fire, and mechanical herbicide were significant at reducing shrub density and basal area. The mechanical herbicide fire treatment was significant at reducing density and basal area when compared to other treatments. And so the mechanical herbicide fire treatment was the only treatment that actually had a significantly greater impact on herbaceous species richness and increasing herbaceous species richness. And so if we look at our mechanical herbicide fire treatment, it had the greatest reduction in Chinese tallow density and also increased our herbaceous species diversity, which is what we set out to do in our main objectives. We wanted to decrease the Chinese tallow density and also increase native species diversity in the understory. And we did this by helping to promote ecosystem function through the use of prescribed fire. So if we look at our effects of our treatments on, this is just Chinese tallow. This is the same figure from way in the beginning of the presentation. So if we look, we had densities of around 1,000 to 2,500 stems per hectare, basal area of around 3, regeneration around 1%. But if we look at our final survey, we have a marked reduction in Chinese tallow density, about 200 for herbicide, about 275 for herbicide fire. Mechanical herbicide was about 400 and about 55 for a mechanical herbicide fire treatment. And if we look at the regeneration, they're similar throughout, but you can definitely see that there is some regeneration still in our mechanical herbicide fire treatment, meaning that there is going to be a need for follow-up treatments, even in this treatment type. So bringing it all together, let's go back to the objectives that I started out the talk with. So we set out to determine the most effectively ecologically based management option to reduce Chinese tallow abundance and establishment. We found that the mechanical herbicide fire treatment had the greatest impact on density of Chinese tallow without a significant increase in regeneration. We also wanted to determine the treatment effect on native species abundance and diversity, and I'm still working on much of that data to see what species actually were affected either negatively or positively by our treatments. But we wanted to promote native species diversity and ecosystem function. The mechanical herbicide treatment was able to reduce understory density of our shrub species, including Chinese tallow. That was a main representative in that, the mid-story. We are able to increase ground flora of native species, and hopefully we're going to be able to establish a frequent fire return interval in this treatment type to help control Chinese tallow, and that's something that we're still working on for future research. And so what we still need to know is what is going to be the impact of repeated fires on Chinese tallow and the community. So we need more treatments, more fire, and we need to monitor the success of this. Matthew here is standing next to a sprout of Chinese tallow. You can see that the above portion was killed by the fire, but that we already have sprouts that are about 50 centimeters in height. And this is only two months after our fire treatment. So there's still quite a large regeneration pool even in these treatment types. And we also need to look at post-treatment successional processes. So we need to understand what's going to happen into the future in all of these treatment types. We might see a reduction now, but is that going to continue to maintain throughout time? And so at Paris Island, we were also able to do a few additional studies, which included looking at disturbance and invasion dynamics in two different sort of legacy types. We have our disturbed forests, which is where all of our research for the treatments came from. And then we have our sort of remnant forests. Now our remnant forests were not formerly agricultural, at least till 1939. And so you can definitely see a difference in the understory and midstory density and also sort of species complexes between these two stands. So that's what we're looking at understanding more. We were also able to determine the non-native seed dispersal by white-tailed deer. We were specifically looking at if Chinese tallow is dispersed by white-tailed deer. We did not find that that was the case, but white-tailed deer were dispersing a lot of other non-native small-seeded species at Paris Island. And then we're also doing a comparative stem analysis of Chinese tallow and two fast-growing native species. The species that we're comparing Chinese tallow to is our slash pine and sweet gum. And so we're looking at differences in growth over time. Chinese tallow is a fast-growing tree, but it's only lives to what's documented about 100 years in comparison to slash pine and sweet gum, which are longer-lived species. They also grow to greater statures than our Chinese tallow. So we want to see at what point in time those two native species, sweet gum and slash pine, will actually outcompete Chinese tallow. So with that, I'd like to thank my funding support, which is the Department of Defense, Army Corps of Engineers, and the Cooperative Ecosystem Unit, my major advisor, Jeff Wong, and my committee, Pat Layton, Tom Waldrop, Joan Walker, and Billy Bridges. And this work wouldn't have been able to be completed without my amazing technicians that I stole from undergrads here at Clemson, and that's Stephen Broom, Hunter Hadwin, and Matthew Ackelboom. And then this project is as much theirs as it is mine, but these guys here are the key guys for how this project actually came to be and how it progressed through the 4 years that I was there. Charles, Van, and John, they worked tirelessly to help me with the mechanical treatment and also the fire treatments. They were definitely there on the weekends and on holidays helping me out. So with that, I will take any questions if anybody has any out there.
All right, thank you so much, Lauren. Once again, if you guys joined us during the presentation, my name is David Godwin, and I'm the Outreach Coordinator for the Southern Fire Exchange. And we just had like I said, a great presentation from Lauren Pyle, PhD candidate and researcher at Clemson University on Chinese tallow management. So as she said, if you guys still have some questions, we still have some time remaining. You can go ahead and type those into the chat pod on the left. See if we can
Yeah, and once again, I apologize for having a little bit of a cold. There was a moment where I had to take a break so I didn't cough on the microphone. All right, Brennan, you have a question. You are asking the fire return intervals we're looking for. Really, we're looking for 3 to 5 years, maybe even earlier on, more annually than that, to sort of suppress that Chinese tallow population. If your Chinese tallow, like I said, it has thin bark when it's young, and so if you wait too long, it actually can have thicker bark that will impede fire, resulting in mortality. It also produces seed within 3 years, so making sure that you're knocking it back is really important to reduce the propagal pressure in the community. And you also ask if we GPS the percentage burn. No, we actually set out transects, and at every 1 meter point we determined if that area was burned or not. We also looked at the fuel characteristics, so whether it was live oak, which really does not burn, or if it was pine or Chinese tallow. So hopefully that answered your question.
Oh man,
All right.
questions are coming in. Did you see somebody was asking about the Kate, the herbicide treatment? Was that conducted prior to the mechanical treatment or after? And then was there a retreat or a repeat of the mechanical treatment?
So no, the mechanical treatment actually occurred prior in the spring to the herbicide treatment. So it was spring and then follow-up of any regrowth with herbicide in the fall. So prior to the mechanical, no herbicide treatment. And then there was, yep. Okay, so that should answer that question. And so Wayne, what to do when so much of regeneration is wetland killed by herbicide? Fire is not going to be possible. Yes, Wayne. So a lot of people ask about how to control Chinese tallow, and these stands are a little bit different than I think where a lot of people see Chinese tallow getting into, which is going to be your wetland sites, especially in Louisiana and Alabama. And you know, fire is not going to be possible in those stands, but however, the mechanical and coming back with herbicide might aid in reducing the Chinese tallow density. I know one of the things that helped with the mechanical treatment was that it was able to reduce density to a point where going in with herbicide was much easier. Anyone that's tried to apply herbicide with a backpack sprayer in really dense stands can find that it's really difficult to move through those areas, and also it's easy to miss things when you're out there. So being able to have a broad application of something that kind of just reduces the density to a point where it is manageable can make a big difference. And Colby, if you get into a stand where when the tallow is young enough, do you think fire alone would be effective? Colby, I'd hate to speculate on that, but I think fire is a treatment that we could be using to help control Chinese tallow, but we need research to be done on that, and I think moving forward, that is definitely something that we need to look at, especially if you're going in there, say you need to do a thinning operation, sort of operates the same way as a mechanical mastication, where you're basically reducing anything that you're not, you know, thinning out your stand for, and then going back with repeated prescribed fire might actually be a good way to manage these type of stands.
I had a question I want to add to that.
Yeah.
It looked like most of those sites at Paris Island had been without fire for quite some time based on the mid-story. Did they have any sites on the island that were in a more frequent prescribed fire rotation? And if so, did you see Chinese tallow on those sites in such abundance?
So John Holloway is actually the natural resource manager, and he's actually one of the participants in the group. But the big problem with Paris Island is that it goes through changes in the hierarchy of the Marines that are there. Mm-hmm. And so, and they change, I think, every 2 years. But the problem is convincing the military that burning is a priority. And so even this spring, we fought really hard to be able to put these fire treatments in with the people that were there. And it, you know, John and them, they work so hard to do the job that they do, but it really depends on what the Marines want at that time and what they believe is actually a good thing to do. So there was actually quite a few number of years where they were not able to burn at all. And most of those stands, the last time that they were burned was in 2004, and that wasn't even all the treatment areas. So, and of course things were really fast on the coastal plain. So it's a difficult place to work in terms of having to deal with all of the other parts of the military. You know, we had to be very careful on impacts to troop training in terms of where the smoke was going and things like that. So, all right, Chris. Okay, so Chris, you're asking me on the herbicide mix. The foliar application is a water, so volume 2.5% volume to volume with water, and then the For the basal bark dormant stem applications, hack and squirt, that's going to be volume to volume with the methylated seed oil. And Jovan, is any work being done with biological control? There is work out there. It's not something that I know a whole lot about, but there is some research out there, as well as most other invasive species. And Chris, I see you're following up with Kobe on the fire. Yes, Jim Grace is the one that's done a lot of the work with fire, and actually how we developed the methods were based on Jim Grace's sort of gray publications. Okay, Jim Moyers. Any estimate of regeneration source, seed bank, or coppist of treated individuals? We saw them all. We saw regeneration by seed, regeneration by stump sprout, by root sprout. One of the things that we were doing out there is trying to look at where things were coming from. Unfortunately, like I said, these treatment areas were only, an acre to 5 acres in size, and Chinese tallow is bird dispersed, so seed source can be coming from pretty much anywhere. And it really is a vigorous and very competitive sprouter. So that's why it's super important to make sure that whatever treatments you're doing them, you're doing in a short enough interval that you're actually controlling those sprouts before they're reaching a reproductive maturity. Adam. All right, Adam, do you feel modified brown and burn, mechanical herbicide, and then burn when possible? Yeah, it's kind of what we did. We, you have to reduce the understory to be able to burn in a lot of these sites because carrying a fire is difficult. But yeah, that's kind of what we were trying to go for there.
All right, it looks like we're starting to wrap things up on the questions and come pretty close to the end of our time. So I think we have time for probably one more question. Let's see. Adam has one. Training smoke is part of the process. Yeah, that's similar to the case you see for management on many of the military lands is the various objectives of use, balancing the mission with land management. It says, why did you space out your treatments? As you said, it depends on person charge, but why not a private landowner? Why did you?
I think, are you asking about spacing out your treatments across the island? Because we wanted to sort of capture all of the different types of, community types that we had there at Paris Island. So we wanted them to be spaced throughout. That helps aid in the science of it. And then Paris Island's been trying to control Chinese tallow for quite a few numbers of years, and they needed the work to be done. So that's why we were there.
Well, sounds good. I think it's a great project, and thanks so much for joining us today and sharing your research with us.
Yeah, and if you guys have any questions, please feel free to email me.
Thanks again, Lauren, and we hope that today's webinar will be useful in your fire management, fire research programs, and in managing Chinese tallow on your properties. So have a good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Lauren.
Thank you. You guys have a good afternoon.